Ah. Good evening. My name is Greta McLean, and I am the founder of Silent No Longer Tennessee. And on behalf of Silent No Longer, as well as Women's March, Power Together Tennessee, I want to thank everyone for being here for the Double Jeopardy When Gender and Racial Bias Collide panel discussion. Now, the questions that I'll be asking this evening to our panelists fall in 5 main categories: workplace bias and pay inequity, implicit bias in healthcare, the lack of diversity within the criminal justice system and its impact on public safety, advocacy and policy, and finally, anti-discrimination laws and available legal remedies. Now, we'll be taking questions from those watching on Facebook Live, so if you have a question, please place it in the chat, and if it's for a specific panelist, please include the panelist's name. I'm very excited about the wealth of knowledge and diverse experiences and insights that we have on our panel this evening. We have a very diverse group. The first that I'd like to introduce is Leanne Carmack. She advocates for justice and the arts, works to create a world where every person of voting age exercises their right, where discrimination is remedied through justice, and where the arts are granted as much respect as sports. She serves as Public Policy Chair of AAUW Tennessee in Murfreesboro, where she organizes voter registration events, teaches salary negotiating workshops and lobbies for eliminating the salary history question on Tennessee job applications. She evaluates arts appreciation and roles, board member, dance interest of Rutherford Arts Alliance, and she is the co-founder and advisory board member of Blue Moves Modern Dance. Elena Ferguson, she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology with an African American Studies concentration from the College of Holy Cross before obtaining her Juris Doctorate degree from Belmont University Law School. She's currently the If, When, How Reproductive Justice Policy Fellow at Healthy and Free Tennessee. After earning her law degree from George Washington University Law School, Tricia Hertzfeld focused on constitutional law and on providing criminal defense services for immigrants. And in 2012, she became the legal director for ACLU of Tennessee. She's now with Brandstetter, Stranch, and Jennings Law Firm and is a member of the Legal Advocacy Board for Workers' Dignity Project. And in the interest of transparency and full disclosure, she's also serving as the attorney for Silent No Longer Tennessee. Chief Kay Loki began her career with the Metro Nashville Police Department in 1996. During her career with the department, she's worked in areas such as at the Training Academy, training new recruits, in the Background and Recruitment Division, and she was the captain over the Domestic Violence Unit. In 2020, she was promoted to Deputy Chief over the Administrative Services Bureau. Doreen Stewart is a state-certified family model provider, an advocate, and an activist. And as a woman of color, she has seen both gender and racial bias in the healthcare system and has herself experienced racial bias by law enforcement and the healthcare system. And I began my career as a police officer 12 years for 12 years, starting at Vanderbilt University Police Department before going to the Metro Nashville Department, where I worked starting off as a patrol officer, then a field training officer before becoming a detective in the Adult Sex Abuse Unit. After I left the department, I became the Victims of Crime Coordinator with the Tennessee Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, before moving on to the YW Domestic Violence Shelter as an advocate and support group facilitator. After being raped in 2017, I decided to start Silent No Longer. Now, do any of our panelists have any questions before I begin asking questions? Okay. Chief Loki, I am going to start with you. I know that you have some time limitations. So, um, first question, I'm going to preface it with just some information before I ask you the questions. A recent article in Police Chief Magazine by former Newark, New Jersey Chief Yvonne Roman pointed out that comparable countries like Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom have nearly twice as many female law enforcement officers as the United States. She also noted how stereotypes of women being physically weak or too emotional has often created a devaluation of qualities that women statistically are shown to possess. International Chiefs of Police report also emphasized the fact that women typically possess better communication skills and are more empathetic than men, and typically are able, when female officers are present, deadly force or excessive force is less likely to be used. Does the lack of female officers affect how female victims in general, and more specifically, I guess, victims who are women of color, are viewed and treated by the criminal justice system?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate this, and I am very honored that with all the individuals here on this panel, you come with some great accolades. Thank you. I want to first start off by saying that to be a police officer, and Greta, I think you would agree to this, you have to be a good person. You have to want to help people. I've sat through so many interviews where we will ask an applicant, why do you want to be a police officer? I want to help people. So a majority, and I emphasize a majority, of our officers are good people and they do want to help others. But let's take a look at what women can bring to the table. As you mentioned, they're empathetic and they're good communicators. But let's look at this a little bit broader. I think women have good communicating skills, they're problem solvers, they're critical thinkers, and they usually have high integrity. What I'd like to see is for police departments to do more of a focus for qualities, for characteristics, attributes, instead of for physical traits or tactical knowledge. I think police departments should be focusing on attributes, because you can't give those to people. Either folks have them or they don't. But we can train you to be physically fit. We can train you to clear a room. We can train you to respond to different calls for service that you will. But we can't train you to have integrity. We can't train you to be a communicator. These are things that you need to have coming on board and that women usually already have. So I think as we reach out to women and as we try to build atmosphere of appreciation, celebration of women in law enforcement, I hope to see more women want to apply for the department, because I think that we do have a ability to be empathetic and able to speak with victims in a way that I think is more beneficial. And I'm not saying that men cannot do that, because they certainly can. I've answered many calls with police officers and I have learned from them. I thought, wow, I've never thought about responding to someone like that. So there's things that I can learn from them. But it's just, I mean, when you look at what women bring to the table, we'd be fools to not want to hire women in this police, in law enforcement all around. We really would. So for the Metro Nashville Police Department, because I do oversee the application, the hiring, and the training academy, those are some of the things that fall under my umbrella. We're going to push out. Those are the attributes we want. That is going to be a constant theme as we go out and we seek applicants. Do you have integrity? Do you have empathy? Can you communicate? Can you problem solve? That's how we're going to hire. That's how we're going to recruit. That's how we're going to test for. That's what we're going to train for in the academy. And that's what we're going to bring through the FTO program, the Field Training Officer program. We need to start talking that talk. Everybody needs to, if an officer is met on the street by someone that says, hey, how do you be a police officer? I want the first thing that comes from them. Well, Are you, do you got good integrity? Can you problem solve? I mean, I want that to be the first thing that we speak to. I think with those abilities, we'll give better service and we'll be able to relate and develop better relationships with the community that we're told that we should protect and serve. So those are some of the goals we have right away. We're going to be pushing out some posters, and we got a little video about the 5 attributes, characteristics, whatever you want to call them. Those are the qualities that we seek. Those are the qualities that we think will serve Nashville better. And I think other departments are already doing that as well, but we need every police department in the United States to do that. I think if we first approach with, we want attributes, we want qualities, I think it'll be more attractive to women and to minorities, which we're lacking so desperately in our profession.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you very much. Um, do you think that it will help increase the community safety overall once that is accomplished?
Well,
Kind of
I,
going back to the, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
think we're only going to get better. Yes, I really do. I think that with these qualities, attributes, whether it's men or women, sorry, I think that yes, we'll be able to connect better with our neighborhoods, with the neighborhoods we're responsible for. I think we'll show and be able to be more compassionate, um, and only good can come from that.
Excellent. I appreciate that very much. I, along the lines of public safety, I was reading a recent study by the Department of Justice and the CDC, which found that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men in the United States have experienced severe um, physical and/or sexual violence at the hands of intimate partners. We've all heard about gender bias or gender and intimate partner violence, but it went on to talk about how both gender stereotypes as well as implicit and explicit bias can affect not only law enforcement officers, but district attorneys and judges and other members of the criminal justice and judicial system. And that perceptions of sexual assault and domestic violence incidents um, can be colored by those biases. The same report also stated that gender bias in police policy practices, as far as providing training on bias, is an integral part or an integral component of combating sexual assault and domestic violence, and that it can have a real and a very immediate effect on not only individual safety but public safety in general. And it says that it's important to have policies in place, and I know that Metro and a lot of departments are working very diligently on that. I just wanted to speak kind of from my experience as well, as a law enforcement officer and as a detective. I unfortunately did witness some uh, gender bias during my career, as well as LGBTQ bias, from fellow officers, a fellow detective, and even a supervisor. Um, there were a few times where domestic violence calls involving LGBTQ women or lesbian women um, were often referred to as cat fights and not domestic violence. Um, I had one particular sergeant who said, "Well, you kind of wasted your time taking this report, but yeah, I'll go ahead and sign off on it." Um, there was another instance where a male couple uh, were in a domestic violence uh, incident, and the my backup was like, "Well, how much damage can be done with a bunch of 2 girly boys or sissy boys?" Um, so it was very sad and disheartening then to hear that. The worst, I think, was a male victim who was sexually assaulted by a female, and had come in to report when I was a detective and wanted to, go ahead and try to get a warrant and everything, and took him down, and the commissioner didn't want to issue it because men couldn't be raped. And I had another incident where it was medical personnel, not the I can't think, the nurse practitioner who did the MLE, but some of the staff at the hospital who were saying that, well, what man doesn't like sex, whether it's rough or forced? So I think we definitely have some work to do in not only the healthcare community, but also in all parts of the judicial system as far as addressing it. And hopefully that's something that we can accomplish. And I know, again, Chief Loki, that's something that you are working hard on, and I do appreciate your effort.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Does anybody have anything else they would like to say about this topic before we move on to the next question? Okay. All right. Leanne, I'm going to start with you, but with the next series of questions, but I want any of our panelists to please feel free to add any additional information or insight that you would like to give. I've kind of picked people who I know this is more their specialty, but I value everybody's feedback, so please feel free to jump in and offer anything that you like. Leanne, in October, Brookings Institute report noted that a variety of instances where women of color were impacted more severely by gender bias in the workplace. One example they gave was that studies have shown that Black women are less likely to find mentors who are willing to help them advance within their career. And they also pointed out that the statistic that's often quoted about women making 79 cents per every dollar that a man makes isn't exactly accurate. That is accurate for white women, but research shows that Black women only make an average of 64 cents per every dollar, and Latinx women make only 54 cents per dollar.
Native
What
Americans
can
even
we
less.
do? I'm sorry?
I said Native Americans make even less, and Pacific
Yes,
Islanders.
yes. What can we do as allies and advocates to advocate or lobby, whatever word you want to use for it, for policy changes so that it is more equitable? And is there any way to help enforce whatever legal or whatever laws there are out there to make sure that women are getting a fair shake?
Thank you, and thank you for having AAUW Tennessee. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak to this issue because it's what we advocate for pay equity is our primary focus. As you were saying earlier, Black and Latinx women, the gender pay gap is really, it's 82 cents to the dollar in Tennessee. Tennessee ranks 20th in equal pay, which is, it's in the top 50%. So a lot of people think that's great. There's only one law in the Tennessee Blue Book that deals with gender at all. It says employment cannot be based on sex. You can't give or take away a job. But we fight to eliminate discrimination that is associated with that. So for 3 years, we have been supporting and sponsoring and drafting and writing to eliminate the salary history question on job applications in Tennessee, because that unduly affects women, where gender discrimination is passed down to the next level because people are basing a salary that someone else gave to this person. Not necessarily, the salary history question is typically used to lowball women, because HR research shows that women will take a 5% increase over what they were making at another position, whereas men won't move unless it's 10% or higher. So I personally teach negotiation workshops to teach women and seasoned professionals how to negotiate their first time salary. Because as you were pointing out, over a woman's career, and we calculate that as 47 years, the pay disparity costs a white woman $400,000. So if she had been paid equally, she would have $400,000 more dollars in her IRA, her retirement account, her pension. But for Black and African American women, it's $800,000. And for Latinx women, it's over $1 million because they are paid so much less in this, for anything. But my suggestion as to what we can do about it, I have a little slogan in my group. It's called Vote Right, Call March. And that's what we need to do. We need to vote for people who support our beliefs. It's very hard in Tennessee to find those candidates that are female forward. But WTF, I don't know if you're familiar with that group, Women for Tennessee's Future. They do a great job of finding women and advocating for them. Rutherford Cable and Nashville Cable are excellent organizations for mentoring programs. They have huge mentoring programs. So I advocate that to any woman, and it's really at a point in our history where we have to do more than retweet or share a meme. We have to make our politicians accountable to us. So we have to vote, call, write, march, and lobby. If you don't know who your representative is or your state senator, that's the first thing I would say to learn. Who is working for you? Find out their contact information and join one of these organizations that is already advocating for these changes. There's Awake, there's Free and Healthy Tennessee, there's A Better Balance. There's so many organizations. And these people have been in the lobbying process for eliminating discrimination for quite a while. Last year, we just passed the Tennessee Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and it took us 6 years. It took A Better Balance 6 years to pass this legislation. And it basically says, if a pregnant woman needs an extra break or to go to the bathroom or a stool, it's okay to give it to her. Eliminating discrimination and implicit bias is not on anybody's radar in the Tennessee State Legislature. Maybe 4 or 5 people it is, but the industry lobbying is high dollar and high pressure. So know your legislators, vote, and hold them accountable. That's what I would say. And know how much pay discrimination affects you in the long term, because at the same rate we're going now, equal pay will not exist until 2106.
In going along with what you were saying, this wasn't on the script, but just a question that I now have, talking about lobbying and the legislature. Is it potentially a good idea for advocates, activists, and just the general public to also do a little research and see who is donating to the campaigns and lobby companies as well? Because if companies believe, we've seen recently how
yes,
companies
the power
have
of the
responded
purse.
to Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
I said the power of the purse. Yes, it's very much so. But in Tennessee, it's a lot different. It's because you can't protest everybody that donates to these people. It's impossible. So
right.
getting
but if
involved
you get the high dollar.
That's a long shot. I would certainly advocate it for it, but we need to be having laws drafted. We need to be talking to our legislators and our representatives, asking them what they stand for, ask them to tweet about their values rather than their favorite Bible verse. You know, we don't get much action or responses from our legislators because they don't have to. They do not have to respond to you. They don't have to answer my letters. And so when I get someone who does, I stay on them. I stay with them for a while. But people need to write their legislators. They need to look at what is going on at Capitol Hill, because it's not eliminating discrimination. I'll tell you that.
And we saw evidence of that in 2019 with the whole David Byrd issue. You know, they just totally ignored a bunch of women. So
He got reelected, you guys.
exactly. And
So,
I know
I
that
mean,
isn't what this is about, but it just goes to show, you know, how things work. My other question, I know you mentioned cable and leaving one
and
other. Are there
WTF, cable,
right?
AAUW Tennessee. We have 13 branches across the state. There's the ACLU. There's the Tennessee Equality Project, Better Balance, Awake, Free and Healthy in Tennessee. There are lots of organizations, Planned Parenthood, that are working very hard in Tennessee to at least, you know, the hope of changing our code is very slim, but we have to make them say it to our face, because it is harder for them to look me in the face and tell me, I know you're right, Leanne, but I owe somebody a favor and I'm going to have to cash in this time. Sorry, I can't vote for this, although I know it's wrong.
Right.
Or,
do you have any? I'm sorry.
oh, I've also been told, you know, if you could get a different sponsor, if you could get a Republican woman to sponsor your bills, I would have a much better chance of at least getting. We did get out of subcommittee, and this is our first year in 3 years that we've ever made it out of subcommittee about the eliminating the salary history question from the Tennessee job application. But then COVID hit and it changed everything. So
Yeah. What would you advise smaller organizations, faith-based communities, or just a group of friends who are, you know, maybe entrepreneurs or something? How is the best way for somebody to start a mentoring group and reach out to different businesses and let women, again, particularly women of color, or any person of color, whether it's Black or Latinx, Native American, let them know that, hey, we're here to help you, you know, strengthen your resume, strengthen, you know, your interview skills, whatever, become a mentor to these women.
starting your own, I think it would be a very difficult process with just a few people. But if you join one of these organizations, they already have mentorship programs established. And, you know, even if you go to a smaller cable, not Nashville, because it's expensive, you know, for just the average person if you don't have a business membership. But they already have well-established programs. And even if you just ask a member, they can sometimes get you involved with those programs already. But the best thing you can do is support each other. I mean, just when your friend calls and says, this happened to me, answer the phone. When your friend calls and said, I was discriminated against, write that letter to your legislator saying, vote no against this. You have to be more vocal than online. You have to be vocal in person.
Can I add to that for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. I
Please.
don't want to interrupt, but I think those are all really great suggestions. But, the other thing that I personally have found in dealing with, these issues over the years is that it's really important for us to bring up other people with us, right? So, as you climb the ladder, as you get further up into management or running, your own, department or organization or small business or whatever it is, you have to be really intentional. Because the stuff, it really, really is built in and you don't really see it, right? You look at, at law firms, for example, and you can say, well, this person went to this school and, arguably that's higher ranked than this one. And so that's what makes up that salary differential. Or, this one took off 2 years between undergrad and law school, or, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of things that you can do to justify a differential in pay. But until you're really about it and making a point to say, I'm going to look at exactly how all of my employees are paid, exactly, what work I'm getting from who, and is that equal? Do I need to bring this up? Am I looking at, some sort of historic factor that's depressing their wages without being intentional about that? I think we all have a tendency to lose it. So, I like to speak to my daughter and her friends, she's in college, and younger people who work in my firm, younger people who work in organizations that I know, and have those really open and honest conversations. Hey, how much money are you making? People don't like to talk about that because it's so embarrassing. And we've kind of been told like we're not really supposed to talk about how much money we make or when my last promotion was or how I'm being treated. But we have to kind of take away some of those, I think, some of those stigmas and be like, hey, woman to woman or, friend to friend or boss to whatever, who cares? How much money are you making? When is your last promotion? When is the last time you tried? Tell me what your salary negotiation went like. What do you mean you walked in and said, oh yeah, sure, I'll take that, 2%. Thank you very much. When, the guy up the road just got 10% because he walked in and said, I want 10. So, I mean, that's not like anything from a lawyer's perspective, but
I know, but it's so teaching these negotiating skills workshop to young women, college age women. I mean, you can almost see them cry when they try to say the sentence, I bring value to this position because I have a degree, I have run a company, I have, managed my social organization on my campus. But this is the first time we have to be free to speak out loud about opportunities and discrimination. Because in Tennessee, you can still be fired for talking about your wage with your coworkers. It's still a fireable offense. And our first round of legislation with the pay discrimination came with a Transparency Act where we're trying to eliminate that as a cause for firing, and that you can't be retaliated against for talking about your wages. But just like with the Trump administration, they haven't collected salary gender data in the whole 4 years he's been president. He just said, we don't want it. And you can't justify things you can't prove.
Thanks to both of you very much. I appreciate that. That's a lot of good information. Anybody else want to offer anything?
If I could just jump in right here.
All right,
First,
I'm
I'd like
going
to
to
thank.
go to the next. Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, Greta, I'd just like to thank you for having me. And I guess I like to first address, just want to name that this whole pay equity issue is like an intersectional issue. It's like the reason why Black women make way less than white women is because they're both Black and women, right? So just want to name that intersectionality. And also, I guess, once you're done having these conversations with your coworkers about what you all make, I guess it's very important to also be willing to sacrifice for your coworkers. So if I don't make as much as my white colleague, and we've discussed that, and we both know that about each other, then what is my white colleague going to do? How is she going to go to bat for me, knowing what she knows about our pay discrepancy? I think that's very important as well.
Very good point. Thank you, Elena. And I'm going to actually turn to you next on anybody, but I think this is more your specialty, Elena. the next set of questions. And it's a 2017 research study called Implicit Bias in Healthcare Professionals, reviewed 27 studies that directly examine racial bias in the healthcare system and 10 studies that examine gender bias. Of the 37 total studies, 35 of them identified both gender and racial implicit bias in healthcare professionals, which led to patients receiving a lower quality of care. Elena, in your opinion, in the work that you do and the knowledge that you have, does implicit bias, especially nowadays with the pandemic, does it pose an increased danger to overall public health?
Well, yes. Well, first of all, I guess I just like to say that I'm speaking from a reproductive justice lens. So when I say reproductive justice, I mean the right to have a child, the right not to have a child, and the right to raise that child in a decent living. So just want to frame that first. But I guess in terms of implicit bias, just like every other institution in America, the healthcare system is built on racism and patriarchy and white supremacy. So of course, there's a lot of bias within it. But in that, I guess the bias is obviously one thing, but it's just more of a power dynamics, like because healthcare was built on these racist ideologies and things. That's why our healthcare system is so overtly and subtly racist. So, for example, from like a reproductive justice standpoint, Black women are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth or right after they give birth to a child, for example, or Black infants are 2 times more likely to die compared to their white infant counterparts. So just things like that. That's kind of how this these larger power differentials kind of play out. And just in terms of Black women, oftentimes when they go to the doctor, they don't feel understood or they feel misheard, like the doctors aren't listening to them. And that kind of goes into it as well, just because if they don't feel heard, then they can't advocate for themselves. And that is kind of where the big differences in health outcomes for Black women come, is being able to advocate for yourself and make your position heard, and being able to kind of make the doctor aware of what your pain is or anything like that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and jump to Doreen real quick. Doreen, I know you have had personal experience with racial bias in the healthcare system. Can you share your story a little bit with us?
Yes, thank you for having me. I also wanted to mention that I can speak for the African American community. Many in the African American community, especially elderly, they have the fear of going to the hospitals and certain situations because of the past history of being mistreated. And also concerning COVID vaccine now, there are a lot of people that have concerns about taking the vaccine because of, the past history of abusing men and women of color. So that definitely, is a concern. And as far as my experience, when I was having monthly menses and I had severe pain, I went to several doctors, and at that time they were men, and they, I'm sure many women have heard the same thing. It's just something you have to go through. Take you an aspirin, get you a heating pad, it'll be over soon, just deal with it. So as a young person, that's all you could do. So when I became a woman, I went back to the family doctor that I had at age 23. And I was in severe pain now. And I was told, well, it's the same, it was the same scenario. However, I said, okay, look, I've had it. I want a hysterectomy. And this white male doctor said to me, I'm not going to do that without even doing any tests on me at all. He just said, you may want to have children someday. You need to get married and have children, and I'm not going to do it. So I didn't know what else I could do, right? Small rural town. He's supposed to be the best doctor. So I just accepted it. And then years later, 33, went back again foolishly. And that's something, I try to educate people, is that you can go to another doctor to get a second or even a third opinion. So I went back to the same doctor, and he says the same thing. And he says, well, if you really want a hysterectomy, you're going to have to sign a form saying you're not going to sue me in case later on down the line you want to have children. And I'm like, for real? And I said, I know I can't have children. A woman knows their own body. I knew something was not right. And I said, if I wanted to have children, I wouldn't survive, or the child wouldn't survive, or both of us wouldn't survive. There's something going on. Again, he did no test, none. But he did refer me to a gynecologist who, ironically, just said the same thing. You need to get married and have children. Yes, this before any test. So they did some tests, and she said, well, you probably have endometriosis. And this is a female doctor. And she says, okay, we'll have the hysterectomy. We'll do the hysterectomy. It'll take maybe half an hour. Well, that half an hour turned into almost 6 hours because I did have endometriosis. I also had, she said, so many fibroid tumors. It was like popcorn. And the main thing that was causing my severe pain all of my life was because my colon was stuck to my ovaries. Now, can you imagine your colon stuck to your ovaries? But yet all those years, no one wanted to do any tests or the correct test that, for them to find out why I was saying I'm hurting. And we've all heard in the news lately of the Black woman doctor who was in the hospital and had the same concerns of pain and no one taking her seriously. So I always tell not only just Black women, any person, if you're going into the hospital, have someone to advocate for you, to be there. Of course, now with COVID, that is very difficult, but you need someone to oversee your care.
Yes. Thank you very much for sharing that, Doreen. I very much appreciate you. Anybody else have something they would like to add? Okay. The next set of questions is for anybody. Most of us know social justice movements usually experience some form of backlash. I mean, it's happened throughout history with the abolitionist movement, the suffrage movement, civil rights, and more recently with Me Too movement. And as we're pushing for change, especially gender bias change, as advocates, do any of y'all have any suggestions or have found something that really works for you as far as helping to prepare for the backlash or take preemptive steps that may help minimize or eliminate the backlash? Okay.
I'll take that one.
Yes, ma'am, please.
when I saw this question, I wrote down, if anybody can do this, please give them a Marvel movie, because they are a superhero if they can determine that in advance. Because backlash comes from places you never expect, and you can never plan for all of it. So a step that we have taken is that is one person's job to address all the naysayers. It doesn't interfere with the rest of the group. We keep marching forward. And if you just have one person deal with that or handle it or choose not to respond and just keep moving forward, you have to, this is a political strategy to create distraction. That's all it is. And don't take the bait.
And I can say, I mean, I totally agree with that. And I think it's super hard to try to even anticipate what the backlash will be, because sometimes it's just totally shocking. But from a litigation perspective, I also think that you want to be really thoughtful if you're trying to make change through lawsuits, right? If you're trying to make change through litigation, you want to be super careful about how it is the lawsuit is brought, how it is framed, who your plaintiff is, what court it's brought, how much you're asking for. And that can be super frustrating from an advocacy position, right? Especially if you're an organizer or you're someone who feels really strongly about whatever movement it is. You really want to get in there and you want the courts to say this and you want the law to change, and whatever happened to so-and-so was just so wrong. And you feel that sense of, I want to get this fixed, or I'm angry about it and I want that to be righted in some way. And so we all think, okay, well, we'll go to court, right? And you'll sue, or you'll get an injunction, or a judge or jury will say, you were wrong. And that'll make the change. And, that's a great impulse. And I love that people have such faith in the justice system. But specifically when you're trying to make systemic change, for whatever issue it is, civil rights related is specifically what I do. You really want to be careful when you're creating new law to be really, really, really well thought out. Sometimes you take the case that comes to you, and sometimes you plan the case ahead of time. And, that conservative kind of nature of, no, you're not the right plaintiff, or let's find somebody that has a different background, or, let's try to make sure our group of plaintiffs is, more representative in X way can cause a lot of tension, I think, between the legal side of advocacy and kind of more the, boots on the ground organizers kind of advocacy. So kind of coming together to have the communication to work out, what the plan is from an organizing strategy and a communication strategy and a legal strategy is difficult, but I think worthwhile. I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have kind of on the front end of any planning.
Greta, I'd like to add something to that if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, speaking as, I guess you could say, someone on the front lines, and we've been to many rallies and protests together. I would say to my white advocates, I would say that it's important at certain times when there are protests, rallies, that because you are white, you can be in the forefront before a person of color. What I mean is, we can see what happened the other day at the Capitol. And then you could tell the difference of how the police, law enforcement, others acted towards a group of, angry white people. And then there were peaceful, well, multiracial actually, but a lot of Black people. You could see the difference when they were protesting peacefully. So when I've been to meetings before a rally, I would say to many of white people would say, well, what do I need to do? And I say, if you see that there is a danger to a person of color, and you think you can be a buffer for that person, then be that buffer. Which, if you see a police officer, they're less likely, unfortunately, it's been proven, they're less likely to do harm to a white woman than they are to a Black man or a Black woman. So for someone who is a regular protester, that is what, as a person in the white community, can do.
Thank you, Doreen. I appreciate you pointing that out, and absolutely right. Thankfully, in Nashville, we do have some good groups. Well, not just in Nashville, in Memphis as well. We've got Neon Guard. We've got, oh gosh, there's the, I forget something collective, and I hate myself that I've forgotten the Dangerous Collective in Memphis that help provide trainings for that, how to keep yourself safe at a protest, but also how to recognize and almost nonchalantly move so that you are putting your body in, as a white person, you're putting your body in front of those that would probably be the most likely target, people of color. And that's something that Silent No Longer wants to work to help provide, work in conjunction with some of these organizations to help provide that training, because a lot of people don't think of that. So I'm very glad that you pointed that out. Thank you, Doreen. Another
I
thing,
I don't know if you saw what I shared with the in the chat box, but that's a mantra that I always, that my African American friends have shared with, that I said, yeah, I know it's about, it used to be put your money where your mouth is, but now it's put your body where your tweet is. But if you're saying you're an ally, then you got to get your body out there. You can't just do it from behind your screen.
absolutely, exactly. And something I came across a couple days ago, I found had some good information. I'm going to include the link in the Facebook chat, and then everybody who signed up for this panel discussion, I'll also send it to you via email. But it's a tip sheet from the Coalition of Feminists for Social Change, and they talked about, backlash can take a whole variety of forms, as we've mentioned already, but that some of the most obvious ones can be, verbal abuse, or even threats of violence. I think most of us know, the things that we can do to help combat some of that. Just be aware of our surroundings, which as women we usually are anyway. We're kind of taught that from a young age. Self-care, which we know about as advocates. We usually preach that fairly well to people that we're advocating for. We don't always practice it ourselves, even though we should. But things like that. But some of the things that they also talked about were other types, like that you don't necessarily think about. Now we have heard of trolling on social media. We kind of, without getting too political, we know we can probably identify a few trolls and instigators as of the last few years on social media. But something to think about if you have an organization that's advocating for victims and it's on social media, is to make sure that you set your settings so that any comments has to be approved before they go public. That way you don't have trolls saying some nasty stuff that could be triggers for some of the people that we're trying to help. To be honest, I do that, but that wasn't one of the first things that popped into my head, and I'm kind of ashamed of that. Another thing that we saw quite a bit of with the Judge Kavanaugh hearings was disinformation and fear campaigns. And that's something that we probably can address proactively even before we start rolling out some type of initiative, is getting the facts out there. We saw this whole thing as, oh, women, wives and girlfriends, you got to worry because they're coming after your husbands and your sons, and like we're just going to randomly go around and start selecting people off the street and accusing them of sexual violence. But there were some people that believed it. So messaging can be extremely important, not only coming up with messaging strategy and legal strategy like Tricia was talking about, but it's important for us as advocates as well, to try to get the message out there before we start getting that type of backlash. And there were several other things that I'm not going to go into. Like I said, I'm gonna share this, but I was really surprised. It had some really incredible good information. A lot of things that I'd never thought of. So maybe, hopefully, I will find it beneficial. No one else has anything on this particular topic. I'm going to go to the next session. Okay. And Tricia, this is your specialty. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act made gender and racial discrimination illegal. But what exactly, for those who aren't legal scholars, what exactly constitutes discrimination, and whether it's in the workplace or the healthcare system or the criminal justice setting?
So it's a really broad question, and actually a really difficult one to put your fingers on. What it is that constitutes discrimination, the person being discriminated against typically knows, right? You feel it, there's some reason that, you're being treated differently, or someone's talking to you in the way that they are, the way that they're looking at you, the way they back up or get closer, when they come into contact with you. People typically know. And if it's something that you've done, right? Your performance, if it's performance related, or, if you're in some sort of a relationship with someone, or, it's a superior or whatever. I mean, you also typically know, right? If something's kind of gone wrong, or maybe you stepped outside the boundaries on something, you can tell if it's legitimate or if there's something else that's afoot, typically. There are more systemic types of bias, right? Whether you're talking racial or gender, or, sexual orientation, perceived gender identity, you get into all sorts of issues there. But a lot of times systemically, those things will be happening and you may not know, right? Which kind of goes more to our pay equity discussions. For example, I had a job where I thought I was being paid just fine, and come to find out my male counterpart was making substantially more than I was, like tens of thousands of dollars more than I was, as a young attorney. And it just never even occurred to me that would be the case, right? Why would it? Of course, I'm just as good as he is. I mean, heck, I might even be better. But so there is sometimes discrimination that's going on in that form that you wouldn't necessarily know about because you don't have access to the information. But I think what you're talking about, and probably most of the people on this call, is, if you've been pulled over by the police and you're being treated differently, if you're being treated differently because you've gone into a store or a restaurant, if you're in your workplace and you can tell that things are a little bit different, that feels like discrimination to you, and it probably is, right? It is to you. I was discriminated against because of X. That's what I subjectively think happened. And your feeling on that's probably right. At least that's how you feel. From a legal perspective, however, discrimination is much, much harder to prove. And that doesn't mean that it can't be proven, but it is a much, much more difficult endeavor than one would hope, and quite frankly, than it should be. And I'm going to go on and on because I tend to talk too much, so just kind of like cut me off if I go too far. But I field calls from people every single day that have been discriminated against from, a variety of reasons, in business contracting, in employment, in, services, hotels, rental car agencies. They don't want to take your credit card. You can tell something's wrong. All of a sudden they're assuming that, because you're a Black man, that credit card that you have, that some fancy black, what are they? It used to be platinum. That was the big deal. Now there's the super, super fancy American Express. I've had those situations where people have come and said, look, I mean, they assumed it was stolen because I'm a Black man and I had this type of credit card and it didn't go through. And of course, the answer was, of course, it was his credit card, right? We all have problems every now and then that the thing doesn't work and the machine doesn't hook up. But there was an assumption there that it was stolen versus likely if it was me showing up, with that credit card, I could feel very certain it would have been a much different reaction with a, we're so sorry, ma'am, your credit card's been declined. So, proving it and not proving it, those are two different things. In order to prove it in court, like if you're actually going to file a lawsuit, which, they're a bit difficult and particularly difficult. They would have thought it was my husband's. That's absolutely right. They would have thought it was my husband's credit card first, and then they would have said, oh, ma'am, we're so terribly sorry. And that is an excellent point, because they absolutely would have. But, when you're trying to file a lawsuit, Tennessee is particularly difficult because Tennessee's laws, I think as we've discussed, are not particularly expansive or helpful. And they're not really falling all over themselves in order to have more lawsuits about people being discriminated against. But the good news is federal law really jumps in and fills in those holes, in a lot of good ways. Now, how those things have been interpreted year after year after year, that's what makes a difference. And so when you start talking about who's in your judiciary, who's appointed by the president, who's confirmed as your district court judge, your Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals judges, your Supreme Court judges, that's what matters because the laws are written by Congress, right? There they are, the words, but it's the interpretation of those words that then changes year after year and decade after decade. So that's why you can have these amazing laws like the Civil Rights Act, right, from decades and decades ago. And yet I don't think you're probably getting nearly as much bang for your buck out of it as you once did, right? I mean, now in order to be able to prove that someone's discriminated against you, I don't want to give legal advice here and I'm not, but you pretty much have to say, somebody has to have said, I am discriminating against you because of X. I don't like you because you're a woman. I think, women can't do this job. I mean, and people do say that, right? You have to have a baby and therefore I don't need you anymore and you're useless because when you come back, you're going to be all hormonal and you're going to have to breastfeed and you won't be the same again. So I don't want you, right? Therefore, whatever. Those things do happen. People are dumb enough to put that stuff in writing. They are dumb enough to say those things out loud. But you can sue and win on those circumstances. But the truth is, you really have to prove that you're a member of a protected class, right? That's important. And a lot of people don't really understand what it means to be in a protected class. And it changes, right? It changes depending on the court and the law. Generally you've got race, national origin, religion, gender. Gender has gotten very interesting lately because gender now, has been expanded for gender identity, sexual orientation, perceived gender identity. And so that's been a definite interest of how things have changed a little bit in the law, that you can look at somebody and before they would have to say that they're gay, which is not a protected class in Tennessee, by the way. But, you'd have to say like, oh, I am gay and therefore they were discriminated against me because I'm a lesbian, right? Whatever. But now, the law has gotten a lot better in some circumstances that it can be like, hey, I thought Trisha was a lesbian and therefore I discriminated against her because I thought she was lesbian. So it's a long, long discussion to say it's all in the eye of the beholder and in the eye of the court. What you can file as a lawsuit can mean one thing, whether it can get past the judge. The judge is always kind of the first arbiter before you can get to a jury. You've got to really have good facts and you've got to have good evidence. I know, of a circumstance of a whole group of African-American women who really feel like they are being discriminated against in their place of employment. Whether they are or they aren't, I don't know, but they all feel that way. So clearly something is going on. But is there enough there? Nobody has been demoted. They haven't had any adverse employment action taken against them. Nobody's had a pay cut. As a matter of fact, people have gotten raises. They've gotten, promotions. They've moved along. But the law really requires that something adverse happen to you. So I think that's kind of one of the other things that gets a little complicated because you can be in an environment where you are being discriminated against And it can feel horrible, right? Because I think, probably every single one of us have been in an environment where that's happened, right? And to varying degrees and for various reasons. But if you're getting up and going to work every day and it feels awful, right? That's horrible. That sucks. That sucks for you. That sucks for your family. That sucks because it goes beyond the 9 to 5 that you're going to work, right? You're thinking about it at night. You're thinking about it when you get up in the morning. You're thinking about it on the weekends. You can have all sorts of effects. But have you actually had an adverse employment action taken against you, right? Maybe no. Maybe your job duties have been reassigned and so you're doing something different, but it's not necessarily less. Those are way, way harder cases to make from a legal perspective because you can't show that you've been harmed by this environment. I think it's actually a place that the law needs to expand. There needs to be a way to kind of compensate for that. Hey, that guy was smart enough and got a lawyer that said, whatever you do, don't pay her less, fire her or demote her, and eventually maybe she'll leave, right? Because that's what happens a lot of times. They just say, well, just don't fire her, don't demote her, keep her pay the same. And if she hates it, she'll go. There needs to be some changes, I think, in the law to address that, because I think, clearly it's going on and we're just being a little bit too rigid in how it's applied.
Greta, I'd like to say something on that, if I could. Greta, can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes, please. Sorry, I was muted.
I'm just going back to the front lines again. In the workforce, it would be helpful if white people who I know have witnessed discrimination being done towards people of color, and they say, well, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to get involved. It's not my concern, they'll have to work it out for themselves. Well, if you want to be an advocate, that's one way you can be an advocate, is to witness that, I see something's going on here. I've heard this. I know this is going on, and I'm going to let HR know. And also, it is important for not only people of color, but all women to be able to speak up for themselves and not be afraid to do so, which, we talked about that, or you all talked about that prior, about, the wage discrepancies. But like even getting a loan at a bank, I was told I could not get a loan when I had an order already for several, because I'm a cookbook author, several thousands of cookbooks. Cracker Barrel was, ready to order, but I didn't have the cash at that time. But I went into the bank with my mother, and the president says, well, you are going to have to get your husband, he says to my mother, and my father to co-sign. But he was not involved in our business. So my mother was an advocate for us, and she said a few choice words, and we got the loan. But had we, she not been a strong woman and to speak out for herself, then we wouldn't have got the loan, and we wouldn't have, made the sale. So those are two things that came to mind that I wanted to bring up.
Appreciate it very much.
Can
Anyone else?
Can I add right back to that for 1 second? Those are really,
Yes.
really great points. And from a legal perspective, it's also really, really helpful because you have to have proof in order to be able to prove discrimination in just about any circumstance, right? And very, very rarely do you have it. You generally have the person who's been discriminated against. But when you have those, I always call those crumbs. And I'm so glad to hear you say that you're an advocate for the same type of thing as well. Like if you see something happening, just file something, write it up. put it in a report somewhere. And I call that leaving crumbs, because eventually that person's going to get busted for whatever it is, right? It may not be for you, but it may be that, that bank gets busted for, doing loans in a discriminatory way, or, whatever it is. And when lawyers like me come across later, we do these very broad subpoenas where we're like, give me everything that's ever talked about, someone who's alleged racial discrimination or discrimination based on, whatever. And we just do these huge broad subpoenas. And so when we do that, we can find the complaints from Doreen and her mother, or, whoever, those crumbs that have been left. And those crumbs sometimes can really make the difference between having a case that actually can survive and make really huge change, versus somebody saying, oh, well, it's he said, she said. So thank you, Doreen. I'm so glad to know that other folks are out there just complaining and, getting the write-ups.
Thank you.
And that goes to bystander intervention as well. Typically, you think of that, or usually when I'm teaching a class about bystander intervention, it's usually sexual harassment, but it goes with anything. And if you see something that doesn't look right, like they've both said, write it down. And then you can go to the person and say, hey, I saw this. I've written this down and signed it if you need it, or I can hold on to, because you never know. They may be like, oh no, this was a one-time thing. But if you get enough, if it starts happening enough, if enough people have witnessed it and documented it, I'm guessing, Tricia, I'm correct, that would be very helpful to have it documented in written form as well, especially if you have a timestamp or something on it, if it
Absolutely.
does go to court.
And the best thing to do is to file a complaint with whoever it is you're complaining against. If you can do it in a safe way, right? If you can do it in a safe way, because not everybody is in a position that they can do it in a safe way. So if you can't do it in a safe way, then, exactly what you said, getting, if you could write it down, or, getting things notarized is always a really good way to like prove that, it was this date and you did sign it and you did do whatever. But, anything, it kind of, we always say it takes a village, and it really does, specifically on, a lot of these cases where you're trying to prove a pattern in practice. And that's what you hear those cases called. The outgoing presidential administration had stopped doing a lot of pattern in practice cases. They just stopped. And so, I think we all know the results of that. But the new administration has said that they're, really going to try to double down on getting those, pattern and practice cases back up. And that's when you see the huge consent decrees and the, the huge kind of systemic change that the Civil Rights Act was supposed to, really, I think was the vision initially.
And not getting involved goes to, and I'm going to use this as an example, having conversations with friends of mine about the difference between not being a racist and being anti-racist. One is passive, one is active. We have to be active if we're going to create any type of change. And like Doreen said, as far as if you see something, speaking up and saying something about it, yes, it may not help you at the time, but you never know. It could come in very handy for you later, because if enough people do it, hopefully systemic change will begin to start, and then we'll all, as a collective body of women, benefit from it, and our daughters can benefit from it, and our nieces and everybody. So, like I believe Tricia said, it takes a village. And we have to be willing to be uncomfortable, whether it's talking about racism or gender bias or whatever. If we're just going to quietly sit there and go, well, I know I'm not biased about this or that, nothing's going to happen. Sorry, that's my little preaching.
I'd like to preach for just a second.
Please do, ma'am.
To add on to Trisha's thing, AAUW is a national organization. We have representation in every state, and we have branches within that representation, just to tell you how it works. So what we are doing a lot of is following the federal legislation. And when you can't get states like Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama to pass fair discrimination, to eliminate discrimination, we are really banking on passage of the Paycheck Fairness Act by the federal government. this year, or at least during the Biden administration. It passed the House in 2019. It's been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for a year. But if that passes, what it does is rectify all these loopholes that have been created. It makes clear definitions of what can validate pay differences, education, experience, seniority. There are 5 factors to do that. But in a state like Tennessee, eliminating discrimination is not on anybody's mind in the legislature. It's really not. So we have to contact Marsha Blackburn, Bill Haggerty, Scott Desjardins is my representative, but you have to tell them not everybody in Tennessee thinks the way you do. And if you don't step out to them, they believe, and they have every right to say, everybody I talk to or hear from feels exactly like I do. Because you have to step up to tell these people they're not representing you specifically, and here's how you feel. And you want to encourage them to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. You have to act knowledgeable. We want the Paycheck Fairness Act. We want the Fair Pay Act. We want the Pay Equality for All Act. There are 3 biggies in the federal system right now. You have to know about these things. It's not just about, it's bigger. It is systemic. And so we have to address it at a big level, because Tennessee is not going to address it on a small level. Same with minimum wage. It would never, ever pass the Tennessee state legislature an increase in minimum wage. There's a bill on it. There's a bill in the session right now. Every year, we're going to go to $10, then we're going to go to $12. And if we sneak it in incrementally, maybe nobody will notice. So it never passes. It never makes it out of subcommittee. It's been there every year I've been to the legislative session trying to increase minimum wage. So we have to count on our federal government for some things, and some of those things are to make our states behave.
Greta, I remember hearing a person who was the chairman several years back of the Chamber of Commerce saying, oh, I told this company that was coming in, this was, oh gosh, maybe in the 80s, they wanted to pay $12. And I said, no, these people wouldn't know what to do with $12. And, you know, he's a community member, and yet he's not willing to help out the people in the community by having allow a proper wage to make a living.
Yes, the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and the National Federation of Independent Businesses are 2 of the biggest lobbyists at Capitol Hill. And every time there's a vote in every session, they send out an email to everybody on that committee saying, here's how you should vote. And if you want to win our Silver Guardian Award, you better vote this way, because that's going to mean a lot when you're running next time. So these lobbyists are not thinking about individual Tennesseans. They are thinking about, just like Doreen said, companies coming here and selling cheap labor, because we have no state income tax, we have cheap labor, and that is the mantra of Tennessee when they're recruiting new business. And we pay them to come here, and they gladly take our money and don't pay our employees.
And a lot of it boils down to taking the time, and it doesn't mean you have to spend hours doing it. It doesn't take long to check facts or to briefly, read some little fact sheet. Learn about who's running. And yes, the federal government does wonderful stuff, and I 1,000% support exactly what you're saying as far as the federal laws, but it also starts at the local level. Learn who's running for judge in your town. Learn who's running for the council. Learn who's running for school board. Be informed. See what they stand for. Because to make a change in our community, we have to start with the people that are running our community, and then we can spread from there. And a lot of the people that run for the local offices, for school board and council and stuff, go on to run for state legislator. So we can't, yes, the federal government can do a lot, but we've seen with the Medicare expansion and the block grant, we have to have people in the state that are willing to do these things too. And we can't just say, oh, it doesn't affect me as much. I hear so many people saying, well, the important elections are the national elections. No, what's happening in your hometown and in your state is just as important, especially for you specifically. So we have to be engaged. And things like you're talking about the Chamber of Commerce. It doesn't take long to look and see who's on the board for the Chamber of Commerce. And you can start with a small boycott of whoever the president of the board is or something. It probably won't necessarily get their attention, but it doesn't hurt to try. Anything you can do to try to give somebody bad publicity if they're doing bad things or make them uncomfortable and maybe move them in your direction, try it. It's not going to hurt anything, I don't think. I don't know what everybody else's opinion is, but
Well, Greta, the Chamber of Commerce, as I understand it, it's just as powerful as the NRA. I mean, they have an agenda, and it's about money. It's not about it's in their name, commerce. So,
right.
I mean, yes,
But
you
we
could.
have an agenda too, and it's people.
That is right, and I will speak up, and I have about it. So, yes, but I think we need to call out the whole organization of the Chamber of Commerce, in my opinion, and to see exactly what they do stand for in your communities. Because to me, I've seen them do more harm to my community than to help.
It is a propaganda masterpiece.
Yeah. Well, I thank everybody. We haven't received any real questions for the Q&A, and we're already close to the ending time anyway. So any final thoughts any of y'all would like to share? Love to hear it.
I would just like to say to please attach the simple truth. This is a document that AAUW National publishes every year about the status of the pay wage gap, the gender wage gap. And the issue is everybody is stuck on saying, oh, 82 cents to the dollar. Well, that's not bad. Well, it has changed. The pay gap has only lessened by 1 nickel in the 21st century. In the last 20 years, the issue is the pay gap is stagnant and we have to move it. So if you would, that's a lot of valuable information about knowing your facts about the gender pay gap. Thank you, and I appreciate being here. Nice to meet all of you.
Hold on. I have shared that, and I will share the other document that I mentioned as well. Excuse me. I want to thank each of y'all for being here. Was there anybody else that wanted to speak up before I close out?
Greta,
I
I
could
would
just
like.
go ahead.
I would just like for you to give attach some information or my phone number or something about my group Dream Network, because we are a small group of volunteers and we do offer free medical assistance, food, shelter towards immigrants. And we also have branched out to include, just anyone actually. The LGBTQ community. There's been a lot of homelessness. So we've just decided we started out with trying to assist immigrants and the children in detention situation, but we do offer those services free. And I just would like you to give out my email or whatever to let people know about that.
I will definitely do it. I will send that along with the others in all the emails. More than happy to do that. And if people on Facebook are wanting to look it up, is it just Dreamers Network? Is that what they need
Well,
to look
it's a
for?
private group, but if anybody is
Okay.
wanting, and we do not have attorneys, so all our volunteers, we are all volunteers, all the doctors, the therapists, people that provide housing. So anyone that would like to volunteer their services, we would appreciate that. Yeah, but they can contact me or Lucinda Sharp, which I will give you that info.
I'll
I
send it
just
out.
want to
Thank you.
add, I just want to add that there is a bill in the state legislature in the 111th session going on right now that says Tennessee to enact legislation that Tennessee would not accept refugees at all. So to make it state law.
Hmm.
I don't have the
Elena,
number, but I can look it up for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Elena, you were wanting to say something, correct? And then I'll come to you,
Oh,
Tricia.
yes. I guess I just want to plug Healthy and Free Tennessee. We are a statewide reproductive freedom organization trying to get some bills passed this session. But also, I guess going back to like the legal discrimination, like how you prove your case, I just want to ground us in like this is about power. So the reason like why the burden is so high to prove discrimination is because people in power don't want you to be compensated for your discrimination, right? So the reason why your boss who's discriminating against you doesn't get fired is because he goes to church with the judge who's going to hear your case, right? So because of that, or why you're not getting the bang for your buck that the Civil Rights Act would normally, that you would think it would give you, while I guess we're waiting for the law to expand and catch up to the realities of the modern world, I guess I would just kind of advocate for you as like an individual, if you're being discriminated against, just to seek help and to use your voice in terms of like publicly, as in like calling it out, but also just like seeking therapy or mental health services. A lot of therapists these days are like doing sliding scales and stuff like that. So just kind of wanting to name that as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good point. Tricia?
I just wanted to thank everybody for having me. It's such a great way to celebrate this holiday and to start out a year that I'm really hopeful for. And so it's been just super great to be with you all and to have this conversation. So hope to meet you all in person someday.
I specifically chose today for that reason. I thought talking about both gender, but especially the racial bias as well, was very appropriate to do it on Martin Luther King Day. So I hope he and John Lewis are appreciated, and that RBG is smiling down on us as well. So, and I thank you, all of you, so very much for taking time out to be here today, especially it being a holiday. Thank you for letting me interrupt your day off to spend an hour and a half or so with us, and for answering the questions and letting me ramble some. I do definitely appreciate it. I have shared those links. I hope that they come in handy for everybody. I want to thank everyone who is watching on Facebook for joining us. And if any of you come up with any questions that you would like to ask, please just email me at silentnolongertn, that's all one word, at gmail.com. And again, if it's for a particular panelist or something, put that panelist's name, or I can try to figure it out if you don't recall. And I'm more than happy to present that to the panelist and see if I can't get an answer for you. If they can't answer, then I will keep searching until I find someone who can. So if no one else has anything else to say, we will go ahead and sign off for the night. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for for being here. I appreciate it, and I hope that you have a good evening.
Thank you, Greta.